Story Chapter 1: The Iron Curtain. In the heart of Europe, where history's past mysteries echoed in cobblestone streets and castle shadows, stood the city of Berlin, now the nucleus of what the world knew as Germania. This gargantuan empire stretched from the azure tides of the Atlantic to the frigid expanse of the Ural Mountains. Within Berlin, steel met marble in towering edifices, each designed to display Germania's iron strength and unmarred vision. Intricate banners brandished the swastika, draped over buildings like confessions of faith to the omnipotent regime. The air was thick with indoctrination, a symphony of operatic power ballads and state-sponsored broadcasts that chronicled the benevolence and heroism of the Führer. Yet underlying this choreography of loyalty was a silent murmur, a growing discord among the people who stepped in rhythm under their leader's watchful eye. In this orchestrated city lived Ingrid Bauer, a discerning young woman whose heart pulsed quietly against the current. Ingrid had never considered herself anything but ordinary. Her life was framed by routine, working in a library where dust-covered tomes spoke of a world now lost. It was here, between yellowed pages and beneath flickering oil lamps, that Ingrid often found solace. She sought stories that whispered of freedoms from another time, tales that kindled her imagination like a moth drawn to the flicker of a rebellious flame. Outside, the architecture seemed designed to oppress as much as inspire. Monolithic statues loomed over citizens like silent sentinels. Gray, uniform buildings mimicked the impassive skies above. Occasionally, Ingrid glanced towards them with a quiet dissatisfaction lodged deep within her, a feeling she could not yet name. Walking these streets, Ingrid had always felt a seeming duality in her existence. There was the obedient daughter who attended rallies, dutifully applauded, and contributed her share to the extensive tapestry of Germania's dreams. But there was also the inquiring mind, furrowed over forbidden books, whose infringing ideas painted alternatives to the monochrome of the present. One particular evening, as dusk encroached and shrouded Berlin in its gentle embrace, Ingrid lingered at a small cafe tucked away in a quieter part of town. As she sat sipping her coffee, her attention was drawn to a pair of hushed voices nearby, a conversation interrupted by the anxious glances exchanged among its participants. Her interest piqued, Ingrid's senses sharpened to the undercurrent of tenseness threading through their words. Her cousin's stories of the fringe, the whispered resistance against Germania, had up until now seemed like distant folk tales, but like a moth to that rebellious flame, Ingrid's curiosity was kindled. With subtlety, she leaned a little closer, ear tuned to catch snatches of their dialogue. A seemingly innocuous tap of a pen here, a crossing of arms there. The conversation was peppered with clandestine gestures understood only by those initiated into the code. Ingrid's eyes gravitated to a small piece of paper that had slipped from one of their pockets to the floor. The resonance of possibility thrummed in her chest. Story. Her heart beat loudly in her ears, each pulse a resonating percussion as she stepped forward, her own shadow dancing beside her on the cafe's cool floor. The paper was a small thing, seemingly insignificant, folded in on itself like a secret yet to unfurl. It felt improbably heavy as Ingrid slipped it into her pocket, conscious suddenly of the world and its eyes upon her. As she walked home, darkness cloaking her path, Ingrid dwelled on the day's events. The piece of paper seemed to weigh more heavily with each step, its potential for change a palpable force. Just how deep did the roots of defiance spread in Germania's concrete soil? And was she ready to explore them? Berlin, with all its grandeur, passed by indistinctly, the looming architecture reduced to blurred, shadowed sentinels against the twilight as Ingrid pushed through her hesitancies toward a future becoming clearer with each step. Chapter 2: Whispers of Defiance. The morning sun peeked cautiously through the cathedral of cloud above Berlin, casting languid pools of light across the city streets. The city awoke slowly, its limbs stretching into the day ahead. Yet for Ingrid Bauer, sleep had been a reluctant visitor. The small piece of paper she had procured nestled discreetly beneath her pillow like a student's prized artifact. She lay, listening to the symphony of the city stirring outside, her mind's eyes tracing the lines of possibility that last night had sketched into her thoughts. The day progressed with typical dispassion as Ingrid completed the mundane tasks prescribed by her job. She sifted through books at the library, each spine a potential portal into realms untamed by the present world's suffocating ambience. Her fingers brushed against the volumes as if seeking courage from their silent pages. But every touch was a reminder of the paper tucked away, a reminder of her impending venture towards the unknown. As dusk settled once more over Berlin, cloaking the city in its comforting anonymity, Ingrid's resolve crystallized. Guided by an impulse she didn't fully comprehend, she smoothed the paper in her hand. The message was simple, a string of numbers and letters that seemed cryptic at first, but whispered of an invitation and a location. An alley in the city's outskirts, known more for its silence than intrigue. Slipping into the woven shadows of the early evening, Ingrid was driven by something beyond curiosity, perhaps a yearning for significance, to be more than an observer of history being inked by distant hands. Her path veined through the city, drawing her past the gaze of marble heroes immortalized in Germania's vision, until the streets narrowed and grandeur gave way to austerity. The alleyway yawned open before her, an almost imperceptible crease in Berlin's orchestrated facade. Ingrid hesitated at the threshold, her breath shallow against the encompassing brisk air. She clutched the paper tighter, guiding her steps deeper into the alley's embrace, where stone walls whispered secrets long brushed aside by time. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in an anonymity that seemed to absorb the diffuse light. The stranger's presence was comfortingly nondescript, their face veiled in a scarf that left only their eyes visible, eyes that bore into Ingrid's with intensity that spoke of lives not chronicled by Germania's propagandists. "Story, you must be Ingrid." The voice was calm, even as it carried the potential of 1,000 stories. "Follow closely, we haven't much time." Though apprehension tightened around her chest, Ingrid nodded, carried forward by a momentum she could neither halt nor fully understand. The path led them through the alley, weaving into aptly hidden corridors and descending paths until the world above seemed a different reality. Their journey ended at a door, nondescript and worn by time. The figure rapped a precise rhythm against its surface. A sequence Ingrid sensed was less a code than a quiet rebellion. The door creaked open into a room suffused with a focused energy, where tension and anticipation mingled in a congregation of resistance members. Faces turned towards Ingrid, evaluating, testing the waters of trust. Here were names she did not know, survivors and dreamers alike, each sharing silently a vow to a world yet imagined. It was here Ingrid met Lucas, a man with eyes as sharp as they were weary, whose reputation in the resistance preceded him. Alongside him was Marta, who exuded an aura of calm determination. Their leadership was palpable, a guiding force in the room's turmoil of plans and counter-strategies. "We've been expecting you, Ingrid," Lucas said, his voice warm despite the gravity that had settled into the space. "The message you found, it was meant for another, but perhaps fortune had other designs." Ingrid felt herself flush under the scrutiny, yet within the same heartbeat found a layer of resolve harden within her. Swallowing her initial surge of doubt, she met Lucas's gaze squarely. "I want to help, however I can." It was in that moment of shared understanding that Ingrid realized the profound depth of what she had stumbled upon, a subterranean pulse beating defiantly beneath the sullen streets of Germania. The resistance, though fractured, was alive, its intentions woven through the populace like threads binding a tapestry few could envision entirely. As plans unfolded before her, Ingrid found herself immersed in their stories, the couriers of hope passing tales like torches. Here were the whispers of defiance that wove a counter-narrative to Germania's imposed reality. And here was the place Ingrid's journey began anew, her role not only as a witness but as a participant in the epic struggle for liberation. The shadows over Germania loomed large, but Ingrid realized that within those shadows, true power lay coiled and ready to strike. Chapter 3. Across the Channel. Across the Channel's frothy expanse lay Britain, a nation reduced but not silenced, its spirit bound temporarily by the invisible fetters of domination. Yet beneath the surface, the remnants of its strength simmered, awaiting rekindling. Here, in the asylum of whispers and covert operations, secrets were safeguarded, secrets that could tip Germania's grandeur into the abyss. It was to Britain that Ingrid and her newfound companions turned their attention. Within these hidden chambers of defiance, plans stirred, an audacious endeavor to retrieve vital information locked within the ruined clutch of the British government remnants. Information that could illuminate the cracks in Germania's facade and bolster the resistance's resolve beyond incalculable thresholds. Ingrid found herself at the precipice of a mission fraught with peril and pulsing with urgency. The operation was a collaboration of necessity and bravery, orchestrated by Lucas and brought to life through the resolute dedication of select members of the resistance. Alongside Ingrid were Marta and Eric, a former engineer who had turned his skills to the pursuit of subversion. The plan, meticulous in its complexity, required the group to cross into Britain under the guise of aid workers, remnants of humanitarian efforts whispered between nations amidst the backdrop of occupation. It was a perilous venture, one teetering on the edge of discovery, yet buoyed by the promise of impactful revelations hidden within British archives. Under the cover of a sulky dawn, Ingrid and her team embarked on their journey, their path winding through the seething arteries of Germania's transport network. With every clandestine maneuver on railway platforms and aboard ferries, their identities shifted like chameleons under watchful gazes. Scripted personas dutifully recited until they felt almost genuine. Landing on British soil, Ingrid was struck by the palpable air of resistance the country exhaled. Though the Union Jack lay folded under the oppressive weight of the swastika, the land whispered tales of defiance through whispers in the wind and the tenacious spirit evident in the eyes of its subdued citizens. The team infiltrated deeper into the thief island nation, guided by contacts who risked everything to aid them. These unsung heroes of the Shadow War ushered Ingrid and her team through concealed passages carved beneath what were once historic sites, now hollowed by conflict and surrender. Their destination lay in the heart of a government building, a structure once resplendent with authority, now overshadowed by the pall of foreign rule. Within its brick shell lay secrets ensconced within vaults of documents that could illuminate weaknesses in Germania's sprawling grasp, messages coded in the language of resistance for Ingrid and her team to decipher. Inside, within the watchful silence, their hearts surged in unison, intent on coaxing the dormant truths from slumber. The building's integrity, though superficially intact, was ripe with vulnerabilities discovered under Erica's meticulous guidance. Time seemed suspended, each tick echoing to the rhythm of anticipation and fear as Marta adeptly bypassed security measures with a deftness born of necessity. As their efforts culminated in the vault's subdued click, unlocking truths jealously guarded by their adversaries, Ingrid found herself at that sharp threshold again, where knowledge could fracture the walls, casting shadows over an entire continent. With documentation in hand, their exit was as calculative and deliberate, shadows vanishing before recognition could voice its alarm. Story. Back across the channel, as their transit retraced towards the heart of Germania, Ingrid's mind whirled with the enormity of their task, her heart emboldened by the potential wielded in these fragile papers. Wrapped in their tight embrace was latent puissance, like seeds poised to undermine that which was deemed invulnerable. Ingrid returned to Berlin irrevocably changed. A shift echoed in the warm solidarity she found amongst the resistance members who awaited her return. Success was a shared elixir, intoxicating and rousing the once fearful hearts with the promise of what they might yet accomplish together. For Ingrid, the whispers of her own defiance coalesced into a steady, powerful voice, ready to herald the dawn of a new, unshackled world. Chapter 4. American shadows across the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, in a landscape painted as much by its promise as its diversity, lay the United States, a giant in ideological repose, wrestling with the shadows cast upon its shores by Germania's relentless ascendancy. Here, amidst the contrasting backdrops of bustling cityscapes and sprawling countrysides, sentiment was as divided as the measures of its geography. Jack Harrison, an intrepid journalist known for his penchant for uncovering the stories behind the headlines, found himself at the heart of this national dilemma, his thoughts playing out like the slow march of a reluctant symphony. For years, Jack had charted the course of this new Europe from the press rooms of New York, his pen a steadfast sentinel against complacency, investigating whispers of the Führer's ambitions touching distant lands. But now, sensing the widening fissures in the manufactured consistency of Germania's narrative, Jack knew the time had come to gaze behind the curtain, to cross the ocean and witness the epicenter of power crafting these tidal influences. His heart resonated with urgency born of stories untold, whispers seeking to howl if only given a voice. Disguised as a historian researching the interrelation of European architecture, Jack's passage across the ocean was marked with trepidation and determination. His infiltration into Germania demanded every reserve of his cunning, a dance of shadows and intentions played out within the bureaucratic machinations of visas and travel permits. Each handshake and nod of approval felt like a gamble with fate, yet Jack's confidence was buoyed by the necessity of his mission. As Berlin loomed into view, Jack's anticipation surged, awash with the enormity inherent in laying eyes upon a reimagined Europe under Germania's thumb. The city's majesty was undeniable, a sprawling testament to order, wrapped in triumphalism and unyielding discipline. Yet even as Jack walked its emboldened avenues, his intuition prickled with a notion that all was not as it seemed. The narrative spun by Germania's architects was fraying at the edges, the reality beneath brittle and fragile. In subterranean corridors and hushed meetings with contacts clandestinely curated, Jack began painting the tapestry of resistance lingering beneath Germania's veneer. Stories unfolded before him, narratives of courage and quiet rebellion, whispers of an enigmatic figure named Ingrid, whose exploits had begun weaving hope into the very fabric of defiance. These chronicles of insubordination underscored the human spirit's indomitable drive against tyranny, igniting within Jack a resolve deeper than he had known. It was within these layers of resistance that Jack first crossed paths with Ingrid herself, their meeting less a collision of strangers than a convergence of kindred spirits, united by purpose. Their interactions were a precarious dance of trust and caution, each drawn towards the other by the magnetism of shared ambition and understanding. Jack found an ally in Ingrid, her presence a testament to the resilience pulsing within Germania's underbelly. Together, they dissected the complex web of control under which the populace lived, a mosaic of illusions crafted to preserve Ayad's version of ascendant design. Jack's insights brought a fresh perspective to the resistance's operations, his experiences providing new strategies by which to exploit Germania's vulnerabilities. In turn, Ingrid equipped him with tales of defiance surging across the continent, pockets of resistance that collectively quaked the monolithic empire's foundation. As Jack chronicled their endeavors, he recognized a story inexorably linked to his own, a narrative of liberation penned not only in ink but carved into history's immutable stone. The American perspective Jack represented was crucial, a reminder that change was both a collective journey and a personal revelation. As shadows deepened over Berlin, Jack and Ingrid devised a plan, each maneuver calculated to exploit fissures now visible within Germania's meticulous facade. Their collaboration unfolded across a Europe that increasingly resonated with dissent, a siren call alerting the world to awaken from silent acquiescence. It was a mission fraught with peril, yet illuminated by the hope of what might be born from their combined endeavors. Together, they would cast their echoes into Germania's imposing halls, intent on piercing through indifference with the cry for freedom. Chapter 5: Eagle and Swastika. The nights in Berlin were orchestrated in shadow and intrigue, where moonlight filtered through Gothic spires and crept along the neatly paved paths that weaved between imposing edifices. It was in this dichotomy of darkness and ambition that Jack and Ingrid found the rhythm of their collective purpose. Their daring escapades were wrapped in the thrill of espionage, a clandestine ballet of maneuverings designed to outwit the eyes that seemed ever dwelling over them. Jack's presence, a representation of the American eagle, and Ingrid's tenacity under the shadow of the swastika, created an alliance forged in respect and sharpened against the whetstone of urgency. Their plan aimed to strike at the heart of Germania's strength, its unshakable facade. Through Ingrid's connections, carefully cultivated within the underground networks, they gained access to information detailing military weaknesses and potential uprisings simmering in Eastern Europe. Meanwhile, Jack supplied insights into potential international repercussions, that ensured their strategies were both incisive and prudent. Story. The air between them crackled with an intensity born from shared peril and a cause that transcended borders. Amidst the danger that hung like a pregnant pause, the chemistry between Jack and Ingrid wove itself into their partnership. Unspoken understandings bridged between them, an intimacy built not on the luxuries of time, but on the demand for absolute trust in moments when their very lives hung delicately in the balance. The crescendo of their operation approached, a crescendo sharpening its edge against the very bedrock of tyranny they intended to dismantle. Together, they compiled the details of their findings, documents exposing the extent of Germania's fragility, cleverly hidden beneath its imposing mien. Ingrid's deft touch intertwined with Jack's acute sense of narrative, transforming intelligence into a narrative weapon that could incite change. In the quiet moments between plotting and execution, they found solace in each other's presence, a brief reprieve clasped between shared conversations, hushed against the backdrop of a world teetering on the precipice. Their alliance was not simply geographical or situational, but deeply personal, fortified by the recognition of each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. With every laugh shared and every quiet word of reassurance, their bond deepened, carrying the weight of unspoken feelings that simmered beneath the urgency of their mission. As the moon cast long shadows over the city, one pivotal night, Jack and Ingrid sat on the balcony of a nondescript safe house, overlooking the sprawling expanse of Berlin. Below them, the streets were alive with the march of Germania's doctrine, yet here they found moments of respite. "It's extraordinary," Jack mused, eyes trained on the distant lights shimmering like stars fallen to earth. "How much power is concentrated in those buildings, and yet beneath it all, it's just fear holding it together." Ingrid nodded, her features softened by the gentle glow of the city. "Fear can only bind for so long, Jack. The people are beginning to stir. Even in silence, change can be potent." Jack turned to her, his expression a mix of admiration and curiosity. "Why do you risk so much, Ingrid? There are so few like you, willing to stand against it all." Ingrid paused, the weight of history's eyes upon her. "Because my silence would cost more than my words ever could. Because someone has to show that there is a choice, that we can still choose to live truly free from all of this." She gestured broadly at the city, "at any cost." He reached for her hand, finding it steady and warm despite the chill of the night. They sat like this, hand in hand, drawing strength from each other, wrapped in the silence that allowed their minds to map out the path found only in the courage of their decisions. The next morning, as dawn painted the horizon in hues of optimism, Ingrid and Jack set forth with their resolve hardened. Their plan, daring and elaborate, involved infiltrating a key military communication hub on the city's outskirts. Their aim was to plant misinformation that, if successful, would cause strategic confusion across the Empire's armed forces, amplifying the tremors of resistance. Story under false pretenses, they gained entry, disguising themselves amidst the bustling throngs of personnel. The atmosphere inside was electric with the ceaseless churn of information. Ingrid's proficiency in navigating such spaces, an asset during prior missions, guided them past layers of security. Meanwhile, Jack recorded every nuance, every crack in the Empire's facade they could exploit. Their operation was swift, every second in the facility a precarious dance where discovery balanced on the knife's edge. They worked in tandem, each aware of the stakes, their movements synchronized by trust and urgency. As they exited, the air outside felt different, charged with the thrill of what they had achieved. Yet beneath the surface simmered an understanding of the challenges yet to come. For every stride made in their battle for freedom, the Empire would inevitably push back. Ingrid and Jack's collaboration was now a fulcrum on which much of the Resistance's hopes rested. The echo of their actions had yet to manifest across the world, but with their document in hand, a sense of shift was assured. Germania's veneer of indomitability might soon be cracked irrevocably, and from those cracks freedom might just creep in unnoticed by those who had too long denied its call. Chapter 6. The Silent Revolt. The echoes of resistance began to swell across Germania's landscape, rumbling softly at first, then louder like distant thunder, gathering strength just beyond the horizon. The information Ingrid and Jack had managed to decipher became fuel, igniting the simmering restlessness into palpable action. Pockets of rebellion, once isolated and fearful of the overwhelming suppression, now began to coalesce into a formidable undercurrent, weaving a tapestry of hope across the continent. Ingrid, like many others invested in this silent revolt, traveled across towns and cities, her presence a catalyst for stirring the dormant embers of defiance into flames. She connected with old networks and inspired new cells, her influence indisputable as she bolstered camaraderie between disparate groups fighting beneath the radar. In the town of Dresden, Ingrid found herself in a damp cellar beneath an ancient pub, a covert meeting place where the shadows of past conversations hung like specters against the walls. Here, she was joined by others eager to sow seeds of change, students from the university, factory workers disillusioned by the regime's promises, artists who sought expression beyond imposed imagery. The room was thick with energy as Ingrid shared the information Jack and she had gathered, strategic weaknesses, key figures of dissent within the broken apparatus of occupation. Her voice, confident and imbued with a hard-earned gravity, wove a narrative of empowerment and possibility. "We cannot underestimate the strength of what grows in darkness," Ingrid said, her eyes alight with conviction. "Every act, however small, builds on the last, and soon we will reach a tipping point where the balance will shift irrevocably in our favor." Story voices around her murmured agreement, determination etched into their faces. The resistance was no longer merely whispered dreams and hopeful thinking. It was a movement gaining momentum, its collective voice growing louder with every passing day. Meanwhile, Jack's influence across the Atlantic was beginning to seep into the American consciousness. Through carefully veiled articles and clandestine conferences with key influencers back home, he shed light on the simmering uprising in Germania and the oppressive grip it sought to dismantle. The American populace, once indifferent or fearful of provoking an already powerful foe, now began to question the boundaries of isolationism and the moral imperative of justice. Back in Berlin, Ingrid and Jack's alliance continued to prosper amidst the clandestine meetings and plotted strategies. Their partnership became a beacon of light in the maze of darkness, guiding those willing to challenge the status quo from complacency towards defiance. They mapped out communication data sets, distributed leaflets, and unrolled clandestine radio broadcasts that found their way into even the most tightly sealed reaches of Germania. The seeds they planted yielded unprecedented results. Riga saw its workers hold a strike that paralyzed the ports, and Paris streets echoed with the footfalls of protesters demanding an end to silence. Even in the heart of Berlin, surreptitious graffiti began to appear overnight, symbols that spoke to the collective bravery taking root beneath the Iron Curtain. It wasn't long before their activities caught the unwanted attention of the Gestapo, Germania's shadowed enforcers, whose presence was as pervasive as it was insidious. They launched raids, interrogations flexed through corridors of despair meant to unravel the tangled threads of rebellion. But the resistance, forewarned by trust well placed, sidestepped capture, slipping from sight like mist at dawn. In those tense times, Ingrid and Jack found fleeting moments of solace together, their confessions whispered by the light of a single flickering candle in rooms thick with the scent of adrenaline and untangling conspiracies. Their relationship, forged amidst the crucible of resistance, had grown into something profound and precious. Ingrid found comfort in Jack's unwavering resolve, his optimism unyielding no matter the adversities faced. Together they shared the burden of leadership, a dynamic duo blending their strengths to inspire and ignite change. As the empire's grip strained against the rise of defiance, whispers of betrayal within Germania's hierarchical structure began to surface. Discontented factions plotted, their allegiance shifting like sand, responding to the pull of tidal change. Rumors abounded, tales of unrest within military ranks, and questions clouding the once unchecked authority that held power. Jack and Ingrid knew the tide was turning, but every victory brought new challenges, compelling them to stay agile in their approach, always one step ahead of the relentless pursuit. Story together, they ventured steadily toward a pivotal confrontation between freedom and suppression, a coalescence of hopes and sacrifices poised on the precipice of change. The silent revolt they had played a part in orchestrating was gaining in urgency, echoing the unyielding human spirit determined to cast off the shadows and usher in the dawn of a new era. Chapter 7: Cracks in the Empire. Ingrid stood upon a balcony one morning, the pale light of dawn staining the Berlin skyline with its nascent glow. Her gaze unfurled over the city, a confluence of history and ambition. Everywhere, monumentality attempted to impose the permanence of Germania upon the world. Yet in this hour, hush cloaked the streets and offered a different kind of insight, that of fragility beneath the facade. Jack soon joined her, cups of steaming coffee in hand. Ingrid accepted the warm mug with a nod of gratitude, the aroma rising to mingle with the cool morning air. Their eyes met, both reflective of the tempest they had navigated and the courage they embraced. "Do you ever wonder if we've bitten off more than we can chew?" Jack's question lingered, not as a doubt but as a philosophical inquiry into the scope of what they had undertaken. Ingrid considered thoughtfully. "Sometimes. But even doubts are part of the equation, aren't they? They remind us of what we're fighting for, a chance for everyone to walk freely, without weight on their shoulders." Jack nodded, that characteristic determination sparking in his expression. "And do you see it? The cracks forming?" "More than ever," Ingrid replied, her voice soft but infused with strength. "Even in those who wear the uniforms of our oppressors, there's a flicker. I've seen it in their eyes." Indeed, the empire was beginning to creak beneath the strain. News of small victories spread, bolstered by the meticulous strategies orchestrated by leaders like Ingrid and Jack across the continent. Each tremor triggered another, and Hitler, once seen as the omnipotent architect of Germania, was now a man increasingly plagued by paranoia. Unseen divisions within his ranks began to surface, as whispers of betrayal and dissent filtered through the corridors of power. Within the hallowed walls of the Reichschancellery, tension mounted. Reports of sabotage, disruptions, and spreading insurrections poured in at an unnerving pace, punctuating the Führer's meticulously planned empire with stark realities of resistance. General von Struve, a high-ranking official within the regime, stood at the precipice of a monumental decision. Having long served the ideals Germania espoused, he found his loyalty tested not just by facts revealed, but by a conscience long buried beneath propaganda's weight. His inner conflict mirrored the growing unrest within the military ranks, as allegiances became as opaque as the smoke drifting from war-torn horizons. Sensing an opportunity within this turmoil, Jack reached out to General von Struve through a network of intermediaries, proposing clandestine dialogue. The general's response, curt yet tinged with curiosity, opened a channel Ingrid and Jack had only dreamed of accessing. Story. In a shadowed part of the city, beneath vaulted ceilings of what was once a grand ballroom, they met the general. His demeanor was cautious yet perceptively weary, eyes scanning the room not just for threats but for the truth he could no longer deny. Ingrid, poised and resolute, spoke first. "General von Struve, we stand at a crossroads, with everything to lose and yet everything to gain. Germania cannot survive unchallenged, not now." Jack followed, the conviction in his voice unwavering. "We know you're aware of the fractures within your forces and the shifting tides of public sentiment. We've come to propose not mere subversion, but a realignment, a chance to pave the path forward without the bloodshed that's marked our past." The general scrutinized them for a moment that stretched interminably. Here sat two architects of rebellion, representative of the voices he'd been taught to silence. Yet in their presence, he recognized an unyielding determination he could neither ignore nor dismiss. "What you ask," the general began, words laden with hesitation, "is treason. To step from this path would mean exposing myself, my men, to untold retribution." Jack intervened gently, a layer of pragmatism lining his offer. "Or it represents salvation, a chance for redemption, for your country's redemption, one unmoored from the false narratives binding it." The general sighed, the weight of myths conscripted into his understanding slowly peeling away. For in their words he found echoes of a truth he'd once fought to protect, a Germany unburdened by hatred, driven by genuine unity rather than enforced obedience. "I'll think on it," von Struve relented at last, his voice marked by a hint of reluctant resolve. "But know this," he added, leaning closer, "our empire is vast and its shadows long. What you're trying to ignite might sink us all into darkness before dawn ever breaks. With the meeting concluded, Jack and Ingrid knew they had set another ripple in motion, one which could ultimately decide the fate of countless lives. As they left the shadowed remnants of the ballroom, they carried with them both the burden of uncertainty and the flicker of a new hope, a symbol of the resilience they had inspired from the depth of adversity. Increasingly, the cracks within the empire broadened. Reports of dissent within military ranks came to light, while the populace, once subdued by visions of grandeur, began vociferously questioning their reality. Even as the Gestapo intensified its hunts for resistance members, the seeds of liberation cultivated by Ingrid, Jack, and countless others had taken root too deeply to be easily uprooted. Ingrid knew the endgame was approaching, an internal clock within her ticking towards climax. How the world would shift after the impending confrontation remained a question freshly poised, inked against the fabric of time by the boldness of the Resistance's silent symphony. Chapter 8. Crossing the Rubicon Story. The hour had come for the Resistance to execute their most audacious strike yet, a calculated upheaval poised to unseat an empire long perceived as insurmountable. In whispered agreements penned across shadowed continents, allies held tightly to plans designed to fracture the stony grip of Germania's power. In Berlin, as night draped the city in its opaque shroud, a convergence of purpose coalesced beneath the surface of anticipation. Resistance cells positioned across the city awaited a single signal, the agreed-upon moment to assert their most vehement objection to tyranny. Ingrid and Jack, the lodestars of this silent cadre, prepared themselves in the confines of their makeshift headquarters. Their eyes, though weary from months of meticulous strategizing, blazed brightly in anticipation of imminent change. "This is it," Ingrid murmured, her voice imbued with both trepidation and hope. The words hung in the air like the tension that filled the room, heavy but invigorating. Around her, her companions in the resistance steadied themselves for the revolution they hoped to ignite. Jack nodded, the fire of determination in his eyes mirroring Ingrid's. "No turning back now. We've come too far, and too many people depend on this moment. We're ready." Their plan was simple in its audacity: coordinated strikes at key points of infrastructure to cripple Germania's communication and transportation networks. With every conduit of power disrupted, the resistance aimed to plunge Germania into confusion, making space for the insurrections brewing in the heart of its territories. As the clock neared midnight, Ingrid gave the signal, a simple gesture that would reverberate across the continent, uniting disparate bands of rebels in a concerted effort. Each group acted autonomously but in perfect synchrony with the broader objective. Explosions echoed through the night, distant flames painting the skyline with the promise of liberation. Lines of communication disrupted, power grids flickered and fell dark, while railway lines, the lifeblood of Germania's ability to move troops, were severed. In the ensuing chaos, Jack and Ingrid took to their roles with precision, coordinating messages across their network, their voices calm amidst the orchestrated turmoil. They moved like phantoms through the streets and back alleys of Berlin, dispatching critical updates to keep their plan on track. In the skies above, the atmosphere was a battlefield waiting to descend. Radio waves crackled with reports from different parts of Germany, confirming that resistance cells were striking against local garrisons, factories, and supply depots. Even as the regime mounted its response, the strikes continued, with acts of defiance spreading like wildfire. Disillusioned soldiers hesitated to fire on their fellow countrymen and women, many defecting instead to join hands with the resistance. A sense of unrestrained hope began to seize hold of the populace. Doors that had shied away from opening in fear now creaked ajar, providing sanctuary to fleeing allies and eager participants ready to fan the sparks of rebellion. Yet, even in this glorious disruption, danger loomed. The Gestapo moved swiftly, desperate to disassemble the nerve center of this uprising. Their agents prowled the city, hunting for Ingrid, Jack, and the leaders whose influence now threatened to unseat the Führer's truth. Jack and Ingrid's intimacy of shared peril became their cloak, their fleeting safe houses marked only by the faith of those who hid them. Their journey, though fraught, was marked by the resilience sparked by every moment they had endured together. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the world watched. Reports of the chaos circulated, piquing the curiosity and conscience of those in positions of influence. The strategic genius leveraged by the resistance could not be ignored, forcing nations once passive to reassess their positions. In the United States, leaders once reticent began openly discussing the potential of supporting the newly emboldened resistance. Politicians who had danced around involvement found their voters pressing for action, their rhetoric driven by Jack's accounts of the resistance's courage and the documented truths revealed. Ingrid and Jack's actions stretched beyond geographic confines, echoing across the globe. As news of their uprising reached oppressed territories under Germania's flag, voices once silent began rising, emboldened by stories of agency and hope. While the night wore on, Ingrid and Jack found themselves holed up in a church's bell tower, overlooking a city now teeming with possibilities once confined to dreams. The bell beneath them, once stripped of its voice, seemed to tremble with their every movement. Jack turned to Ingrid, the flutter of chaos a distant murmur at their back. "What do you think? Did we manage it? Did we manage to crack open the empire?" Ingrid smiled, a brilliant and resolute expression that mirrored the coming dawn. "I think we showed them that shadows are not endless, that beneath every heaviness, light waits to be discovered." The world was indeed changing. The line between despair and hope had been effectively blurred. Now it was time for humanity to step cautiously, carefully, trusting in the bonds experience had forged and the collective yearning fanned by every act of defiance. Chapter 9: Alliances and Anarchy. As day broke over a world teetering on the edge of transformation, the results of the previous night's campaign had fundamentally altered the landscape of power. Germania, for all its vaunted control, could no longer disregard the resistance's undeniable potency. The Führer, faced now with burgeoning opposition not only from within but from unexpected fronts abroad, gathered his cloaked minds in grim conclave amidst the empire's finest halls. Meanwhile, underground movements blossomed, nurtured by the precedent of rebellion charted so precisely by Ingrid, Jack, and the army of dissent they had rallied to their cause. Their success created ripples among distant shores and within previously inaccessible halls of power, forcing the world's leaders to reconsider their stances in this dynamically shifting paradigm. Story. In the heart of London, former remnants of the British government hinted at re-emergence, spurred into action by the burgeoning cracks in Germania's facade. Diplomatic wires buzzed with the possibility of an alliance with the American government, one that had been long in the making but hesitant to materialize due to the isolationism that initially gripped them. President Allison Monroe of the United States, who had carefully monitored the developments in Europe, found herself at an intersection that demanded clear decisions. As articles highlighting the resistance's bravery breached American consciousness through Jack's daring reports, public sentiment steadily toward intervention against oppression. A summit was called, uniting representatives from Britain, the United States, and secret emissaries of the resistance seeking to forge new alliances against the renewed tyranny. Ingrid and Jack were pivotal in these discussions, voices tempered by experience and grounded in reality. Standing side by side in a conference room in Paris, hastily decorated to conceal its recent war-torn scars, Ingrid marveled at the magnitude of what they had ignited. The spirit of those present mirrored the anticipation she had first felt amongst resistance ranks, delivering them to this unforeseen convergence. Jack's introductions of key resistance figures paved the way for earnest discussion, with Ingrid adding insights to the intricacies and vulnerabilities of Germania's sprawling network. Old foes contemplated new alliances, recognizing the gravity of an endeavor aimed at dismantling an empire built on a foundation of fear. President Monroe listened intently, her expression firm but open to the perspectives born of sacrifice and solidarity laid out by Ingrid and Jack. "You have all shown remarkable courage," she stated, her voice steely with purpose. "We have a responsibility, not only to our citizens but to humanity, to act against tyranny wherever it may flourish." Her pledge was met with murmurs of agreement. Across the table, former adversaries nodded, aware of the stakes. The future they envisioned was not simply the end of an oppressive regime, but the dawn of a new era, framed by understanding and guided by the lessons hard-won from history. As negotiations unfolded, emissaries transported clandestine messages between underground networks and these emerging alliances, ensuring that collective strategies remained grounded and actionable. Even as these efforts solidified paths forward, pockets of resistance faced renewed challenges as Germania struggled to preempt a complete cataclysm. Yet buoyed by fresh alliances and reinforced morale, movements rallied, infusing new vigor through their ranks. Amid the strategic discussions and rapid evolutions, Ingrid and Jack's chemistry flourished. Their partnership, a fulcrum of this burgeoning revolution, thrived amidst the maelstrom of alliance building and anarchy that painted their days. They found deviations from chaos in stolen moments, shared ideals kindling a connection interwoven with the collective fate they had irreversibly altered. Story. Their final strategy was ambitious, to unite international and resistance forces for a synchronized offensive that sought to undermine Germania's control decisively. Every blow thrown, each act of defiance meticulously planned as a symphony of liberation, orchestrated to resonate across the world with an irrefutable message. As plans culminated, new allies journeyed from centripetal points, gathering under a fresh flag that heralded not domination but determination, one willing to stand against Germania's shadow. The alliance poised itself, fortified by a sense of unity born anew, constantly aware of the cues drawn from Ingrid and Jack's resolute example. As leaders emerged from nascent talks ready to usher others toward cohesion, remnants of suspicion and skepticism began to dissolve. Together, these once diverse elements merged into a formidable coalition, set to alter the course of the existing world and reclaim this age from one of oppression to that of reinvention. With unity now at the fore, the alliance was primed, ready to challenge the titan that had ruled so ruthlessly. Amidst the enriching chaos and painstaking order lay a world on the precipice of monumental change, prompted in earnest motion by the steadfast spirits of Ingrid, Jack, and the countless others who echoed their calls from beyond. Chapter 10. Dawn of New Beginnings. As the final stand approached, a culmination of dreams, resilience, and a multitude of improbably aligned spirits, Ingrid, Jack, and the Allied forces steeled themselves for the inevitable confrontation against the pernicious grip of Germania's looming empire. It would be a struggle unlike any undertaken before, the stakes insurmountable to consider, yet overwhelmingly vital. The dawn broke over the lands, its light spilling across a world fraught with tension, yet pregnant with possibility. Cities awakened under looming uncertainty, whispers of impending reckoning trembling against the curling mist of early morning. It was within these moments, where the night relinquished its hold to the burgeoning day, that the world seemed to pause and hold its breath, waiting for history to unfold. The resistance, now infused with the strength of new alliances and supported by international forces, was a force to be reckoned with. Across Europe, from the urban labyrinth of Paris to the vast plains of Eastern Europe, shadowy agents and open rebels alike awaited the command that would mark the beginning of an all-out assault against the heart of Germania's regime. Ingrid and Jack, now central figures in the coordinating efforts, found themselves at the epicenter of it all. Their plan detailed every possible contingency, every hidden backdoor in the Empire's defenses, and every vulnerability that could be exploited. It was a plan as ambitious as it was necessary, one that required the collaboration of minds who shared no history other than what was forged in this crucible of revolution. The hour arrived, signaled not by words but by the convergence of efforts that began to echo across the continent. In the stillness that preceded the storm, Ingrid and Jack exchanged a glance of profound understanding. They had come a long way. The weight of their journey felt in every nuance of their shared look, every breath that held stories of hope and defiance told between them. Story from the shadows of embattled cities, members of the resistance emerged, united by a common purpose. Cries of freedom rang out, rallying cries that resonated through the streets and countryside, reaching ears now attuned to the possibility of change. The carefully woven fabric of Germania's control began to unravel under this symphony of defiance, leaving seams exposed and desperate to maintain unity. As the Allied offensive bore down on strategic targets, The regime's infrastructure faltered under the insurrection's weight. Communication lines crumbled, command centers were seized, and soldiers, some forced to serve, others disenfranchised by truth, found their ranks dissolving amidst chaotic retreats and passionate surrenders. Desperation mounted within Germania's iron arm. Hitler's once unwavering vision now fractured by betrayal, and his ranks riddled with insubordination. As discipline faltered and tides of rebellion converged, the empire's grandeur could no longer support itself on fear alone. Armies of common citizens stood shoulder to shoulder with professional soldiers, united in their bid for liberation, purposing for a future divined by the people rather than a singular will. For Ingrid and Jack, the last moments of conflict shone with decisions poised precariously on razor-thin edges. Their momentum, the combined momentum of a world awakening, was a wave crashing against the shores of tyranny with unrelenting force. Their heartbeats synchronized with the cacophonous roars of transformation, marking the death of silence and the awakening of freedom. Finally, as the sun dipped into evening's embrace, the dust of battle settled and revealed a world changed. The remnants of Germania's loyalists ebbed away, and surrender interwove through the air, its echo offering something newfound, a path to reconciliation, to rebuilding seasoned well by the past's lessons. Ingrid and Jack, now amidst the joyous celebrations of comrades and strangers who had become family through the tumult, found themselves driven back to introspection. Their role transformed. No longer singular architects of rebellion, they emerged as keepers of renewal, conscious of the lasting legacies their hard-wrought freedom bequeathed. Together, they stood on a balcony overlooking the sprawling cityscape, now free from the shadow of oppression. The air was charged with an energy born of redeemed futures, each face in the throng below painted with expressions of elation and possibilities anew. Civilization, stirred from slumber, greeted the dawn of new beginnings, steered by those who rose to fight not alone but united. Ingrid turned to Jack, gratitude and something deeper threading between them's intensity. "We did it," she said softly, the enormity wrapping itself around her words. Jack smiled, certainty and relief evident in his countenance. "We did, though we have much left to do. But for tonight, let's embrace this victory. Tomorrow, we shape the world anew." As they stood amid the chorus of celebration and jubilation, they found solace in the shared knowledge that hope was not simply a whispered dream, but a determined choice, etched into time by the courage and unity of those who dared to dream and make it real. Story, with shadows receding in the brilliance of a new dawn, the future became a promise, one they would help to cultivate in the growing light of a world reborn. Together, Ingrid and Jack contemplated their path amidst the vast expanse of free sky stretching toward limitless horizons, a journey unfurling, forever anchored by their awakening legacy.